Harry Thompson only did the right thing, took his boss home when she was too drunk to stand. But the next morning, Cara Carter woke up in clothes that weren't hers, in a house she didn't recognize. One panicked phone call to her best friend. One unanswered question hanging in the air. What happened last night? And just like that, the life of a single father stood on the edge of ruin, all because her memory had gone blank. When the truth depends on one person's word, is decency enough to save a man? Harry Thompson had been at Harrison Financial for 6 years, long enough to understand that survival in a place like this didn't come from talent alone. It came from knowing where the lines were and never crossing them. He was 38, a senior analyst, and the kind of man who kept his desk clean, his reports early, and his opinions to himself, not because he lacked them, but because he understood the cost of saying the wrong thing in the wrong room. He had built his life the same way he built his spreadsheets, precise, deliberate, with no margin left to chance. The company's annual dinner was held at a downtown restaurant with tall windows and dim lighting, and the kind of wine list that made people forget they still had to drive home. Every year, it followed the same rhythm, forced laughter, careful networking executives performing generosity, while junior staff performed gratitude. Harry had attended 5 of these dinners. He had never stayed past 9. Tonight was no different. He had somewhere to be, and he intended to leave on time. Cara Carter arrived late, which was unusual for her. She was the department director, Harry's direct superior, and she carried herself with the kind of authority that made people sit up straighter when she entered a room. She was sharp, organized, and respected across the firm. But tonight, something was off. Her smile was a beat too slow. Her words landed just slightly out of rhythm, as if she were translating them from somewhere far away. Harry noticed it the moment she sat down at the far end of the table, but he said nothing. It wasn't his business. He had learned a long time ago not to read too deeply into other people's cracks. What Harry didn't know, what most people in the office didn't know, was that Cara had spent the last 4 months drowning in a divorce that had turned bitter in ways she hadn't expected. She had moved out of her house 3 weeks ago into a rental she still hadn't memorized the address of. Her phone contacts were a mess. Her routines were gone. She was holding herself together at work with nothing but discipline and caffeine, and tonight, the seams were starting to show. By 8:30, Cara was on her 4th glass of wine. By 9, she had stopped counting. Harry watched from across the table as her composure began to unravel in slow, quiet stages, a laugh that lasted too long, a hand that missed the glass on the first reach, a sentence that started but never finished. The colleagues sitting nearest to her exchanged glances, but said nothing. One of them flagged down a waiter and ordered another bottle. Nobody intervened. Nobody wanted to be the one to tell the boss she had crossed a line. Harry checked his watch. 9:15. He needed to leave. He had promised to be somewhere tonight, a commitment that mattered more than anything on his calendar. He pushed his chair back, folded his napkin, and reached for his jacket. That was when he saw Cara try to stand. She gripped the edge of the table with both hands, swayed once, and sat back down hard. Her clutch slipped off her lap and hit the floor, spilling its contents: a lipstick, a set of keys that turned out to belong to her old house, and a phone with a dead screen. Harry looked around the table. 12 people, all of them sober enough to notice none of them moving. Greg Hollister from accounting studied his dessert plate like it held the answers to the universe. Dana Price. Cara's own deputy suddenly became fascinated with her phone. The message was clear: not my problem. Nobody wanted to be responsible for the boss. Nobody wanted the liability, the whispers, the questions that would follow if they were the one seen helping her out the door. It was easier to look away. It was always easier. Harry stood there with his jacket in his hand and felt the window closing. He could walk out right now. He could keep his evening, keep his schedule, keep his distance from a situation that had nothing to do with him. That was the smart move. That was what every instinct he had developed over 6 years in corporate America was telling him to do. Walk away. Protect yourself. Let someone else handle it. But Cara was trying to unlock her phone with a screen that wouldn't respond, pressing the same dead button over and over, and no one at the table was doing a thing about it. Harry set his jacket back down. He approached her carefully, the way you approach any situation where the wrong word could be replayed out of context for years. He kept his voice low, professional, and even. "Cara, your phone's dead. Do you have someone I can call to pick you up?" She looked up at him with glassy eyes and shook her head. She couldn't remember the address of her new apartment. She didn't have her new keys. The ones on the floor belonged to a house she no longer lived in. Her emergency contact, she muttered, was her soon-to-be ex-husband, and she would rather sleep on the sidewalk than call him. Harry tried the restaurant staff. They offered to call a cab, but Cara couldn't give them a destination. He asked Dana Price if she could take Cara home. Dana smiled tightly and said she had a migraine. She was heading the other direction, so sorry. He asked Greg Hollister. Greg said his wife was already texting him about being late. Every door Harry knocked on closed before he could finish the sentence. He stood in the restaurant lobby with his boss, barely able to keep her balance beside him, and he understood with perfect clarity that there was no clean option here. There was no version of this that didn't carry risk. If he left her at the restaurant, she could get hurt or worse. If he put her in a cab with no destination, he'd be the last person seen with her. If he took her to a hotel, the optics would be devastating. And if he brought her to his own home, he was walking into a situation that could destroy everything he had spent years building. He thought about who he was. A single father, a man who had learned the hard way that the world didn't give second chances to people who looked like him when accusations were made. He had spent his entire adult life being careful, not because he was guilty of anything, but because he understood that careful was the only armor he had. And now he was standing in a lobby, holding his boss's purse, watching her lean against a wall with her eyes half closed, and he had to make a choice. Harry pulled out his phone and made a call. He arranged for someone to cover his evening commitment, the one thing he had promised himself he wouldn't miss. It cost him something. He felt it immediately, a sharp ache in his chest that he swallowed and pushed down, because right now there was a woman in front of him who couldn't stand on her own, and he was the only person left in the room. He guided Cara to his car, with one hand barely touching her elbow, keeping a full arm's length of distance between them. He opened the passenger door, made sure she was buckled in, and walked around to the driver's side. Before he started the engine, he sat for a moment and stared at the steering wheel. He knew exactly what this looked like: a male subordinate, a female boss, alcohol, a car ride to his home at night. Every element of a story that could be told in the worst possible way was already in place. He drove home under the speed limit, windows cracked, radio off. Cara dozed against the window, occasionally mumbling fragments of sentences that didn't connect. Harry kept both hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road, and tried not to think about how easily a good intention could be rewritten as something criminal. He pulled into his driveway at 10:14, cut the engine, and looked at the woman asleep in his passenger seat. He had made his choice. Now he had to live inside it carefully and without a single mistake. Harry walked around to the passenger side and opened the door slowly. Cara stirred, but didn't fully wake. He said her name twice before she opened her eyes, unfocused and heavy. He told her where she was, his home, not hers, and that she needed to get inside. She nodded without really understanding, and he helped her to the front door with the same careful distance he had maintained all night, one hand near her arm, never gripping, never pulling. Every movement deliberate, every gesture something he could explain later if he had to. Inside, he led her to the guest room at the end of the hallway. The bed was made. It was always made because no one ever used it. He sat her on the edge of the mattress and stepped back. She was barely conscious, her head dipping forward, her words reduced to fragments that didn't form sentences. Harry left the room and came back 3 minutes later with a glass of water, 2 tablets of ibuprofen, and a folded set of clean clothes, a plain t-shirt, and a pair of sweatpants. Both placed on the chair beside the bed, not on the bed itself. He set the water and the pills on the nightstand where she could reach them. Then he did something that would matter more than he realized. He found a notepad in the kitchen drawer, sat down at the counter, and wrote a note in clear, steady handwriting. He explained who he was, that he had brought her here from the restaurant, because she couldn't get home, that nothing had happened, and that she was safe. He listed the time he had arrived, described the clothes he had left for her, and told her where the bathroom was. He signed it with his full name. He walked back to the guest room, placed the note on the nightstand next to the water, and pulled the door shut behind him. Harry stood alone in the hallway and exhaled for what felt like the first time in 2 hours. The house was quiet. The hallway was lined with framed photographs and the evidence of a life built around someone small, someone who was right now asleep somewhere else, because he had made a phone call and changed the plan. He looked at those pictures for a moment, then turned away and walked to his daughter's room. He pulled a blanket from the closet, laid it on the floor beside the small bed, and lowered himself down. The carpet was thin. The floor was hard. He didn't care. He needed to be as far from that guest room as the house allowed. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, and his mind wouldn't stop running scenarios. He thought about the call he'd made to the babysitter asking her to handle tonight. He thought about the promise he had broken. He thought about what Dana Price and Greg Hollister were probably saying right now, or what they'd say on Monday. He thought about how a single sentence, "He took her to his house," could be repeated in a dozen different tones and mean a dozen different things, and not one of those meanings would be the truth. He closed his eyes somewhere around midnight, but sleep didn't come easy. The morning announced itself with a sound Harry had been dreading, footsteps in the hallway, unsteady and confused. He was already awake, already dressed, already sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He heard the guest room door open. He heard the bathroom door close and open again. Then silence. Then movement toward the kitchen, slow and hesitant, like someone mapping unfamiliar territory. Cara appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing the clothes he had left for her. The t-shirt hung past her hips. The sweatpants were rolled at the ankles. Her face was pale, her mascara smudged beneath her eyes, and she was holding the note he had written in one hand and her dead phone in the other. She looked at Harry, then at the kitchen, then back at Harry. The expression on her face was not gratitude. It was fear. She didn't say good morning. She didn't say thank you. The first thing out of her mouth was a question that landed like a stone dropped into still water. "Where am I?" Harry told her. His house. She had been too drunk to get home. He had brought her here because there was no other option. He kept his voice flat and factual, the same tone he used in quarterly reviews. No emotion, no persuasion, just data. Cara stared at him while he spoke, and he could see her trying to reach back into the previous night and finding nothing there. The alcohol had erased everything after the third or fourth glass. She remembered the restaurant. She remembered wine. After that, blank. She asked if she could charge her phone. Harry handed her a charger without a word. She plugged it in and waited for the screen to come alive, standing in the corner of his kitchen like a stranger in a crime scene, which Harry realized was exactly how she was processing this. When the phone finally powered on, she didn't call a cab. She didn't check her email. She called someone named Jess, and from the way she turned her back to Harry and dropped her voice to a whisper that wasn't quiet enough, he understood immediately what kind of call it was. He heard pieces, enough to know. "I don't know where I am. I woke up in someone's clothes. I don't remember how I got here. It's Harry from work." Each sentence was a brick being laid in a wall that Harry could see rising in real time. He stood at the kitchen counter with his hands wrapped around his coffee mug and felt the ground shift beneath him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't surprised. He had known this was possible the moment he put her in his car. He had walked into this with his eyes open. But knowing a thing could happen and hearing it happen in your own kitchen were two very different experiences. Cara ended the call and turned around. Her eyes were red now, and her jaw was tight, and she was gripping the phone like it was the only solid thing in the room. Harry could see the machinery working behind her expression, the fear, the shame, the fury of not knowing, the desperate need to construct a story that made sense out of a night-shaped hole in her memory. He didn't move. He didn't speak first. He let her come to him because he understood that anything he said before she was ready to hear it would sound like a defense, and a defense implied guilt. It was Cara who finally broke the silence, and she did it with the only question that mattered. "Last night," she said, and her voice was stripped down to something raw and unprotected. "Between us, did anything happen?" Harry looked her in the eyes. He didn't flinch, didn't soften, didn't look away. "No," he said. "Nothing happened." Then he told her everything from the beginning in order, without editorializing. He told her about the dinner, about the wine, about the dead phone, about asking Dana and Greg for help and being turned down. He told her about the car ride, the guest room, the water, the pills, the note, and the clothes on the chair. He told her where he had slept on the floor in another room, as far from her as the house allowed. He told her what time they had arrived. He told her what time he had written the note. He gave her facts, timestamps, and geography, because those were the only things that couldn't be argued with. Cara listened without interrupting. When he finished, she looked down at the note still crumpled in her hand and read it again slowly this time, as if checking his spoken words against his written ones. They matched. Every detail aligned. She looked up from the note, and her gaze drifted past Harry down the hallway behind him, and he saw the moment her eyes caught the photographs on the wall. School pictures, crayon drawings taped to a doorframe, a small pair of rain boots by the front door, the unmistakable landscape of a home shaped by a father raising someone on his own. When her eyes came back to his, something had changed. The fear was still there, but it had company now, a recognition heavy and uncomfortable of what she had almost done without meaning to. She was a woman who had woken up in a strange place with no memory, and every instinct she had, every article she'd read, every warning she'd internalized had told her to assume the worst, and the worst in this case would have destroyed the man standing in front of her. Harry saw the shift in her face and said the thing he had been carrying since the moment he put her in his car. His voice was steady, but there was a weight behind it that came from years of understanding exactly where he stood in situations like this. "I need you to hear something," he said. "I don't have the right to make mistakes in situations like this. I don't get the benefit of the doubt. I knew that when I helped you last night, and I did it anyway, because leaving you there wasn't something I could live with. But I need you to understand what that cost. If you had woken up and told a different story, if Jess had called someone before you called her back, my life would be over. Not damaged. Over." The words sat between them like something sharp laid on a table. Cara didn't respond immediately. She looked at the note again. She looked at the hallway, at the pictures, at the rain boots. She looked at Harry, and for the first time since she'd walked into the kitchen, her expression wasn't defensive. It was something closer to grief, the quiet, nauseating kind that comes from realizing you almost caused something irreversible. She told him she needed to make another call. Harry nodded. He didn't ask who she was calling. He didn't ask what she was going to say. He picked up his coffee mug, walked to the sink, and stood there with his back to her, looking out the window at his empty driveway. He could hear her footsteps moving back toward the guest room. He heard the door close. And then he was alone in his own kitchen, waiting for a woman he barely knew outside of conference rooms to decide, in a single phone call, whether his life would continue the way he had built it or collapse into something he couldn't repair. The minutes stretched. Harry washed his mug. He dried it and put it back in the cabinet. He wiped the counter that was already clean. He checked the clock on the microwave, 7:42 in the morning. He could hear the faint murmur of Cara's voice through the guest room door, but he couldn't make out words. He didn't try. Whatever she was telling Jess, whatever version of last night she was constructing in that room, it was out of his hands now. It had been out of his hands since the moment he decided to stay at the restaurant instead of walking out the door. He had done everything right, every single step, and none of it mattered if she chose suspicion over truth. Harry leaned against the counter and stared at the floor. He thought about the 6 years he had spent building a reputation at Harrison Financial. He thought about the house he had furnished carefully, the routines he had designed around someone who depended on him completely. He thought about what it would feel like to explain to a lawyer why his boss had spent the night at his house. He thought about what it would feel like to explain it to his daughter. The floor was cold under his bare feet. The house was quiet, except for the sound of a voice behind a closed door, speaking words that would either save him or end him. And all he could do was stand there and wait and trust that the truth was enough. The guest room door opened at 7:53. Harry knew because he had been watching the microwave clock the way a man watches a jury door, not because the numbers meant anything, but because staring at something fixed was the only way to keep from falling apart. He heard Cara's footsteps in the hallway, slower now, more deliberate than before. And when she appeared in the kitchen doorway for the second time that morning, she looked different. Not better. Not relieved. Just decided. Like someone who had walked to the edge of something and chosen to step back. She still had his note in her hand. She had folded it neatly this time into a small square, and she held it at her side like a receipt she intended to keep. Her eyes were dry. Her voice when she spoke was low and controlled, and it carried the particular weight of someone who had just been forced to confront the distance between what they almost did and what was actually true. "I called Jess back," she said. "I told her what happened, the real version." Harry didn't move from the counter. He didn't exhale. He didn't nod. He just listened because listening was all he had left. Cara told him that her first call to Jess had been pure panic, the kind of raw, terrified reaction that comes from waking up in an unfamiliar place with no memory and a man's clothes on your body. She had said things on that call that weren't fair. Things shaped by fear, not by evidence. And Jess, who loved her, who wanted to protect her, had reacted the way any good friend would, with alarm, with urgency, with the assumption that something terrible had happened. But then Cara had walked into the kitchen. She had seen Harry sitting at the table fully dressed, coffee untouched, looking not like a man trying to hide something, but like a man bracing for impact. She had seen the note and read it. She had asked him directly and watched his face when he answered. And she had looked down the hallway and seen the kind of home that told its own story without a single word being spoken. "I almost did something I couldn't take back," Cara said. She wasn't looking at Harry when she said it. She was looking at the counter between them, as if the words were easier to deliver to a surface that couldn't judge her. "If I had let that first phone call stand, if Jess had called someone, if I had walked out of here without asking you, your name would already be attached to something that never happened, and I would have been the one who put it there." Harry felt something release in his chest, not suddenly, but slowly, like a fist unclenching one finger at a time. He didn't thank her. Thanking someone for not destroying your life felt like the wrong currency for the moment. Instead, he asked if she wanted coffee. It was the most ordinary thing he could think of, and ordinary was what both of them needed right now. She said yes. He poured her a cup and set it on the counter, and for a few minutes, they stood in his kitchen, in a silence that was no longer hostile.